As we've learned so far in this module, the early church fathers, the apostolic fathers, these early bishops like Ignatius, Polycarp, Linus, Evaristus, they're challenged by and they're fighting back against early heresies. Already in the Catholic Church are emerging incorrect doctrines, heretics, teachers of error. And so they're trying to create ways to establish the true faith. One of those ways is apostolic succession. Only the traditions and teachings that come through those who succeed the apostles are valid, are true. Remember, the Bible has not been put together yet. We're going to look at that in a future lesson, but so far the Bible has not been composed. All they have is oral tradition. And so who do you trust? Well, one of the great heretics of this time that challenged the established Catholic Church was a heretic by the name of Valentinius. Sometimes you see his name as Valentinius. There is a Saint Valentine, that's not this man. Valentinius died around the year 160. He was born in Egypt near the Nile River, and he claims that he was discipled, he was taught by a man named Theodos. And Theodos claimed to have been a disciple of St. Paul. And according to Valentinius, Theodos learned from St. Paul's secret teaching. This is what Valentinius called gnosis, which is the Greek word for knowledge. He said that Paul went around preaching the gospel and preaching faith to all these people, but he had an inner circle that he taught the true, deep, and mysterious teachings of Christ. Theodos claimed that when Paul was elevated up to the third heaven, which Paul describes in his letters with the Corinthians, that he received mystical knowledge, and Paul would only pass this on to a few selected disciples, one of which was Theodos. So Theodos claimed that he got this secret inside knowledge from Paul, which is not true. And then Theodos passed it on to Valentinius. And Valentinius went to Rome, and a lot of the earliest church fathers say that Valentinius went there in order to become the bishop, in order to become the next pope, because he was so highly educated. Tertullian, the early church father, records this about Valentinius. Quote, Valentinius had expected to become Bishop of Rome because he was an able man, both in genius and eloquence. Being indignant, however, that another obtained the dignity by reason of a claim which confessorship had given him, he broke with the church of the true faith. Just like those restless spirits which, when roused by ambition, are usually inflamed with the desire of revenge, he applied himself with all his might to exterminate the truth. And finding the clue of a certain old opinion, he marked out a path for himself with the subtlety of a serpent. So according to Tertullian, Valentinius went to Rome. Another man was chosen because he was a confessor. In the early church, there were martyrs and confessors. Martyrs died. Confessors were tortured, but they lived on. And these men and women in the early church were highly esteemed, highly favored. Their prayers were seen as very effective because they had suffered on this earth for Christ. So another man was chosen to be Pope, Bishop of Rome. Valentinius rejected the church and started his own church with its own theology. We're going to go point by point and bullet by bullet looking at the theology of Valentinius. So Valentinius taught that the highest deity was a deity called Buthos or Bethos, depending on how you want to pronounce it, and that this is God the Father that Jesus Christ talks about. He is the origin of all things, and after ages of silent and internal contemplation, the Buthos, the Father, gave rise to many other beings by emanating them out of himself. The first series of emanations from Buthos are 30 eons, and they're aligned as like a ladder with 15 on one side and 15 on the other, male and female. Now, one of these eons that was towards the bottom was named Sophia, and through her was created by an accident the material physical world, which, according to Valentinius, is evil. Human persons consisted both of a soul, which was a spark that came from the emanations from Buthos, and also were of matter. They had a physical body. But for Valentinius, this body was not good, as we read in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. Instead, the body is evil because it's made out of physical matter. So for Valentinius, redemption was not seen as freedom from sin and being in heaven in holiness. Instead, redemption was being freed from the body, the soul being liberated out of the body. And he said that Christ, the Son of God, came from the Father, came from Buthos, in order to accomplish the liberation of souls out of the body. Now, of course, by teaching this, he's going to reject the incarnation of Christ and say that Christ never really became a physical incarnate man. He didn't have a true human nature. That was an illusion. And he even said, as many church fathers observe in the writings of Valentinius, that Christ, he wasn't born of a virgin. He didn't die on a cross. He didn't physically rise from the dead because he never had a physical body in the first place. And one of the things that Valentinius would mock the Catholics is he would say, you don't really believe that the Son of God defecated. This was one of the things that he would bring against the Catholics. And the Catholics were like, no, he was human in all ways. And Valentinius would mock the Catholics for teaching this. According to Valentinius, Paul had taught this secret form of gnosis that went to Theodos and then went to him, and that you needed this gnosis, this special knowledge, in order to be freed of the body and then pass up through all the eons that had emanated from the Father, from Buthos, and then have a reunion with the divine essence, with the Father. So Jesus is more of like a guide, a tour guide in the galaxy, leading us back to what he called God the Father, or Buthos. Now, St. Irenaeus reported that Valentinius had composed a book called the Gospel of Truth. And what's interesting is this book was lost for centuries. We had no idea what it said, how long it was. But in 1945, the Gnostic library at Nag Hammadi was discovered. And in that was this book, the Gospel of Truth, which confirms for us what Valentinius taught. Before 1945, there were a lot of skeptics who said, well, all the early Catholics, the bishops, the saints, they were saying Valentinius said all of these weird things, but it was a polemic. They were just trying to discredit him. Well, no, now that we're looking at these ancient Gnostic texts, we're seeing that these ancient Gnostics were using St. Paul and obscuring what he says in order to take it into a Gnostic direction. St. Irenaeus himself wrote a book against Gnosticism, against chiefly Valentinius, and the title of that book was On the Detection and Overthrow of the So-Called Gnosis, or of the so-called knowledge. It came into the Latin as Adversus Heresies, against the heresies. This book is available to you in the digital library at the New St. Thomas Institute. And in this work, St. Irenaeus defends the Catholic teaching on the incarnation of Christ, that he's fully God and fully man. He defends the teaching on the Trinity. He defends that the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are the divine and infallible and inspired text documents teaching us about the birth, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And Irenaeus also stresses for us the need for apostolic succession. We must only follow the teachings that come to us from the bishops who succeeded directly from the 12 apostles. And of course, Irenaeus also teaches, like Paul did, that we are saved and justified through faith and through the sacramental economy, baptism, confirmation, Eucharist, etc., and not through some mystical, hidden form of knowledge that's reserved for just a few. What's important about Valentinius and the movement that he started is it provoked a response of apologetics from the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church called upon men, bishops, scholars to begin to think and to write against the errors of their day. And I believe God is doing the same thing for us. Through the Holy Spirit, he is calling you, me, thousands of others to study Catholic theology and to look at the new heresies of our time and to think and write ways that we can refute them and ultimately bring people into the truth of Jesus Christ. Thanks so much for being a member of the New St. Thomas Institute, and we'll see you in the next lesson where we discuss another heretic who is just as dangerous as Valentinius. Till then, God bless.